Hey everyone, Andrew here, and today I decided to review something that I love, considering the last reviews have been a little bit more towards the oh god, no. So, I decided to talk about my favorite book. And this one is interesting because it's been my favorite book since I read it. And it was the first book I ever read that was a chapter book on my own. And I read it in the first grade, and it's been my favorite pretty much entirely since then. There's other times where I say other books are my favorite, but the reality has always been this has probably been my favorite book forever. And yeah, it's an odd one to say the least to have that still be my favorite book considering it's a kid's chapter book, but it's a well-written one, or at least it's an interesting one, and I do want to talk about it. So the name of the book is The Pinballs by Betsy Byars. And I can tell from the way I said that I've listened to the audiobook a few too many times, because that's how the chapter, that's how each of the tapes ends. Just deep voiced, The Pinballs by Betsy Byars. But, yeah, so The Pinballs is a story of three kids who find themselves in a foster home together. The two boys and a girl. The oldest boy, Harvey had entered a writing contest and had won third place, which was a stack of pencils. He asked his father to take him to go to it, and his father promised that he would. So the day of, Harvey is sitting in the car waiting for his father. His father comes out drunk and is saying, "Get out of the car, Harvey." And Harvey's like, "No, you promised me we would go here." The dad's like, "No, I said I would if I could." And Harvey's like, "No, you promised." The dad opens the door, pushes Harvey out of the car, closes the door, locks it shut. Harvey goes around the back of the car to try to get in through one of the other doors. The dad shifts the car into reverse, thinking it's drive, puts his foot on the gas, and runs over Harvey, breaking both of his legs. And that's the very first thing that happens in this book. The only girl in the house is a woman named Carly. And she is a very strong, powerful whippersnapper. And she basically, her mother had been married a couple times, and the newest stepfather, she and him have been butting heads for a while. And one of the times, the stepdad, snaps and hits her, giving her a concussion. But Carly isn't going down without a fight, so she stands up and knocks him out. And is like, "No one hits me without getting hit twice as hard in return." And then collapses from the concussion. She is sent to the foster house until her family's issues are solved. The youngest is a young boy named Thomas J. And he was raised by a set of twins called the Benson twins, who are both in their late 70s. No one knew about Thomas J. No one even knew he existed until the Benson twins slipped and each broke their hips and ended up in the hospital. And the first time Thomas J. had come up, because Thomas J. was not their kid. They found him. He walked up to their front door one night, and they looked around and tried to find someone, and there was no one around, so they took him in and raised him as their own. And now that he's been discovered, he has been sent to foster care until they're able to determine if he has any family or where is the best place for him to go from. So they all end up in the house of the Masons, and basically Carly shows up and doesn't want anything to do with any of this. Is just like, "Nope, I'm just going to watch my television shows. I'm going to pretend the rest of you don't exist. I'm not dealing with this situation at all." Thomas J. shows up, and he's been living with 80-year-olds, so he shouts everything because he's used to not being able to be heard because of their being nearly deaf. And it's just them dealing with the struggles and drama of trying to figure out where they are, where they belong, and what to do, and how to go on. Harvey pulls out paper and is like, "I'm going to write a letter." And he doesn't want to write his dad, obviously. And he wants to write a letter to his mom, but she left to go find herself. And never came back, and so he doesn't know where to even send a letter. So he starts out filling out just lists of things like 10 the movies I've loved, the books I've enjoyed, the gifts I wish I'd received, and what I got instead. And Mrs. Mason tries to get Carly involved and is like, I can teach you how to sew things, how to do things. You're not the first foster kids I've raised. I've taken care of you're my 17th set of kids that I've taken care of in this foster house. And Carly's like, well, why don't you just have your own kid? And it's like, well, I couldn't. And but I wanted to help and I wanted to do the right thing, and my husband and I agreed this was a good way of doing this. And it's like we considered adoption, but they chose to be foster parents instead. Carly's like, all right, fine, I'll agree to do this because it's summer and all the shows are reruns anyway, and I'm bored and I need something to do. So she learns how to crochet, and she ends up crocheting halter tops of all things in neon colors. Thomas J ends up really connecting to Mr. Mason, and he helps him figure out things in his life that he has difficulties with because Thomas J goes to visit the Benson twins in the hospital, and the first time he goes, he's can't say anything. He's just silent. He's unable to think of anything to say or to hold a conversation with. And when they go the second time, one of the Bensons has unfortunately passed away, and he's like, I'm just gonna stand there and I'm not gonna say anything, and I won't know what to do. And Mr. Mason's like, sometimes just being there is enough. Sometimes it's not about saying things, it's just about being there. And he tells him the story of like, when I was a kid, my mother got sick, and we knew she didn't have much time left, and I went to visit her at the hospital, and she asked me to tell her that I loved her. And we never said that in my family. That was never a thing that we said. So when she asked, I was stunned. I couldn't think of anything I couldn't get myself to say the words. I felt it, but I couldn't do it. And Thomas J's like, well, what did you do? And he's like, well, thankfully there was this nurse there who came up and she's like, Mrs. Mason, did you hear it? He said it. He said it real quiet, but he said it. He loves you. And the mother passed away right after. And it's like, I've always been thankful to that nurse. She helped me say the thing that I wasn't able to say. And he's like, I don't think I would have been able to say it on my own. And Thomas J's like, I don't think I would have been either. And they developed this really good, strong connection. So Harvey decides that he is going to write the letter and send it to his mom and tell him exactly what's going on. And he's like, I remember seeing her in this newspaper. And just need to find the article about this commune, and we can send the letter, and she'll come and rescue, and get me out of the situation. So he gets Carly to push him to the library so he can look this up, which leads to one of the best bits in the thing where Carly's pushing him up this giant hill, and she's like, we should get a dummy, and we should dress him in your clothes, and I should just let him loose from the top of this hill and just go running up behind him when Mrs. Mason is going, Mrs. Mason, he got loose, help! And it's like, oh god, that's horrible, but it also makes me laugh. I also like that while Harvey is finding the newsletter and figuring out and doing all that stuff, Carly's like bored out of her mind. She's like, oh gosh, I don't know what to do. And he's like, why don't you just read a book? And she's like, I don't read anything unless it's got nurses in it. And it's like, I've read Hong Kong nurse, Vietnam nurse, North Korea nurse, and it's like, I did want to read Appalachian Nurse, but they never had. I'll go see if they have it. It's like, oh, they have it. And she like opens up the book and like, listen to this. And she reads the first page and then skips through a bit. Like, oh, I hope it gets better. Stops midway. Ooh, listen to this. And then skips again. And it's like, here's the ending. It's like, Thomas stood and held her in his arms. Like, clearly he got his leg loose from that trap. And they kissed and happily ever after. And closes the book. And Harvey's heading out the door, and he's like, aren't you going to check out the book? And she's like, why would I? It's like, don't you want to read it? And she's like, I just did. You saw me read it. Which is the perfect summation of modern day reading. It's just literally first page, middle page, last page, done. Yeah. Oh. No, there's some books that you have to do it that way. It's just not worth it otherwise. But I say as a reader who doesn't like skim reading if I can help it. But Anyway, so Harvey sends a letter to his mom and is waiting for a response. His dad comes to visit him during that time and takes him out to eat. And Harvey tells his dad, "I've sent mom a letter telling her what happened. She's gonna come get me. She's gonna she's gonna show up." And the dad's like, "No, I don't think she will." He's like, "No, she would have she would show up. She if she knew that I was hurt and I was injured." And he's like, "She didn't show up when you had the measles. She didn't know about that." I'm like, "Yes, she did. I sent her letters. I sent her when you got the flu, when you got the measles. She never responded." And you just see and read and feel Harvey break at that moment. And it's described perfectly as like he had a fork in his hand that he was just about ready to snap in anger. And after that, didn't even have the strength to hold it up anymore. And he just kind of shuts down. And he goes back to the foster house and just lies in his bed and doesn't leave. And Carly's trying to, get some energy in him, get some responsive, because she cares about him, but B, she's also bored. And she's like, "You know what? I'm going to paint your toes. I know I painted my own fingers. I'm going to paint your toes." And pulls back his sheets and looks at his toes in the cast, and they're bright purple. And it's like, "Mrs. Mason, something's wrong with Harvey." And he ends up in the hospital and is doing really bad because he just doesn't want to get better. And Carly's like, "There's got to be something we can do. There's got to be something we can do to cheer him up." And she remembers the list that he made of gifts I always wanted that I never got. And number one on that list was a puppy. So she goes with Thomas J. and they pick the most high energy, happy puppy. Because if you have a high energy puppy that's just going to jump up and lick your face, you can't be depressed, right? And of course, with the kid who always wanted a puppy, of course that's what he wants. And it's really lighthearted and really good, happy ending for the books. And the characters grow and become more and better people by the end. So, yeah, that's my favorite book. It's pretty short, pretty quick, easy kids read. I mean, again, I read it in first grade, and it's a level third grade reading, but it's super easy and fun. It's honestly like I still think it's one of the best kids books I've ever read. It's still got it's like it delves into a darker side than kids books tend to get to. I mean, literally the first thing is a kid getting run over and having his legs broken, and then it's immediately followed by a girl getting slapped so hard that she gets a concussion. That's like how many kids books are that grown up and that mature about that stuff. It's like usually it's euphemisms and oh no, these kids are never actually in danger. It's like no, these kids, yeah. And I think that's part of it that I like is it's very doesn't feel like a kid's book. It feels mature. It feels like it has this air of gravitas and deeper meaning to it. And it kind of does. I mean, the entire reason it's called the Pinballs is because that's how they feel in the beginning, especially Carly. Carly is the one that describes it. It's like, we are just pinballs. Someone comes in and puts a quarter in, and out we go, and we're just bounced here and bounced there and thrown all over the place until we settle back into someplace, and then someone else comes in and throws in another quarter, and away we go again. And through the actions of the book and learning to make themselves happy and learning how to grow for themselves, she ends up finding out that they aren't pinballs, that they do have control over how they react to situations. And that to me is really strong. Plus, it's got really good characters, it's got a good setting. The weird thing for me is, like, I've read the book a bunch. I've pretty much read it almost every year, at least every other year since I first read it. And I didn't realize until like 5-6 years ago that it's entirely set in the 1970s. Which, it doesn't really make it that obvious. The only thing that does is when Carly first shows up, she watches a bunch of television shows, and they're like Sonny and Cher, Tony Orlando and Dawn, things like that. It's like, oh, it took me a while, but I did pick up on that. It's like, oh, but honestly, this is almost a timeless show. Like, as far as I knew, those weren't real things. So, it's like, wow. It's an interesting thing that, to me, like, speaks to every generation, or can speak to every generation since it's been written. one of those somewhat timeless kind of books. And I found this interesting because I stumbled on Betsy Byars' website, and she literally has quoted and from her in the bottom of the book is like, the book I get the most questions about and the most letters written to me about is the Pinballs. And people want me to write a sequel and continue it onwards. And, they got tired of waiting, so a lot of people just wrote their own sequels and their own spin-offs. And it's like, all I know for certain is that these kids remain in contact and friends for the rest of their life. And I'm like, that's all I need. I'm like, that's a really good, because these are kids that are better off at the end than they were at the beginning. They grew. They all changed and became different people. But yeah, it's like I still love it. I still think it's amazing. I love the audiobook to it as well. The audiobook is great and is really well done. I recommend either version, but the audiobook is definitely one of my favorite things. And so much so that I don't even own the book. I have the audiobook. But it's a super fun, interesting read. And I found out a few years ago, and I watched it last year, they had a made-for-TV movie made out of it from ABC in the 70s. And honestly, it's okay. It's not the best. It's not too bad. It's sort of the whole story, but sped up. So I'm not disappointed with it. I just think I would have liked it to take its time like the book does a little bit better. But, so yeah, that's my favorite book. Let me know y'all's favorite books, if there's any that you'd recommend. It's something like, I'm reminded of this one because for the book club, we read a Walk the Two Moons, which had a very similar kind of feel to it. It was dealing with more grown-up things, even though it's a kid's book. So yeah, and if any of you have some kids' books or stories that you want to talk about, or you want me to review, let me know. Happy reading.